Thanks very much, Rick. And thanks very much for the opportunity. It really is an absolute pleasure to get to speak to Figen today, an obvious absolute hero. I feel like every time I speak to Figen, I want to become a human sponge and just soak in all of the wisdom and information. And many people probably know your story. People may have heard some of your background. But I think for the people that don't in the room, a lot of people new to the security industry, it might be worth starting off just giving a bit of an insight into why you're here, what led you to this point, and particularly I'm interested in what was that trigger moment for you when you decided this was what you needed to do with your career?
Yeah, obviously most people in here know that our son Martin died at the Manchester Arena attack in May 2017. That was also the last day I worked in my previous job. And I kind of existed the first year, but in that first year, some of my kids bought my husband some concert tickets for a singer that is more his cup of tea than mine. But the concert wasn't until December 2018. And I remember getting ready and using my smallest handbag to make the bag search easy, because I made foolishly the assumption that, especially in Manchester after the arena attack, security is going to be really great. And we walked in and there was no security. They didn't even check our entrance tickets. And as we were sat during the concert, I got really upset. I was to the point I was sobbing, because I couldn't believe that after 18 months, when 22 people were killed, in fact, actually, I want to revise that, 23 people lost their lives. The terrorist died as well. He killed himself. And I can't believe that so soon after, the whole incident has been forgotten in Manchester. And that was early December, and I started researching security at venues. And then in January, I just decided I can't tolerate that this is security at venues is only a recommendation. I thought that's not right. And it only takes that one person, doesn't have to be me, anybody, any person, if they're unhappy, to say, I'm not having this. And I did that. I decided this isn't okay. I'm not having this. And that's when I started my online petition. And that's how Martin's Law was born, basically.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a couple of personal thank yous to you. The first one being from our company, because off the back of the campaigning that you did, the government released a funding call, and that was to improve resilience in public spaces. Okay. And we applied one of our technologies to that funding call, and that's one of the technologies that I was talking about earlier today. This is one of those lovely unintended consequences of the amazing work that you've done. So thank you very much for that. And the second is from a more personal perspective. So my personal passion in security comes from having a probably not so equally traumatic, but a very traumatic experience in my childhood of losing my own brother when I was only 8 years old to an attack outside a nightclub. And so I really feel a lot of what was being talked about in that previous talk around what the motivations really are for doing this, like why are we really doing this? And I think these experiences are what lead us to where we are today, trying to educate people on security and also trying to help people build that personal resilience in their careers so that they can be better security leaders. So I don't want to talk about policy today. I really want to talk about resilience. And I know throughout your journey, you would have dealt with a huge amount of knockbacks over a really extended period of time. Could you tell me a little bit about how you continue to overcome those knockbacks time and time again?
Well, I need to point out at the beginning that my initial online petition was meant to be 6 months, and that's the job done. That was my naive initial thought. Little did I know at that time that it's going to actually be a 6 year, 3 month journey. Yeah. But my resilience, I think, to a great extent comes from my previous training as a therapist. And I'm not religious, but I feel that kind of the universe engineered somehow that I do train as a therapist. All those decades ago, not just to help other people, but mainly to help myself through the worst time of my life.
Yeah. And given that experience that's kind of come together in this mash of incredible skills that you now have to build that personal resilience, what are some of the more practical tips that you can share with some people here today who may want to start about building personal resilience?
Yeah. So the attack happened in the May, and I very soon, because I had, obviously my job was gone, I had lots of time to think and reflect, and I very soon made the decision within 4 weeks to go on national TV and publicly forgive the terrorist for killing Martin. And that actually was one of the most important things I did, because it freed me internally, emotionally, not to even at all dip into anger or hate. And that kept my head and my heart clear, and that was really important. Secondly, which is why I, very early on, I remember a very top-level counter-terrorism person came to my house, and I said, 23 people were killed. And he said, no, 22. And I said, no, 23. And I said, the terrorist died as well. He was a human being. And he said, we don't count terrorists in the number of deaths. And I said, but I do. So again, to acknowledge that to me was really important, because it kept me in touch with my own humanity, and that's who I have to stay with my own value base. My value base is really important to me. That can actually sometimes be a very lonely place, because a lot of times during the 6 years, it felt like I'm swimming against the stream, and it can be lonely. But again, if you know that and you accept that, that's okay, because my value base is that important to me, and it's been my guide, my instinct. And I managed to stick to it, because every single night when I look in the mirror, I personally, and that's my personal calculation in life, always has been, I need to be comfortable with who looks back at me in the mirror. And only then can I know that I've stuck to my values. And that kept me guided throughout. And the other thing I would say that was really helpful is having a helicopter kind of viewpoint. That is, again, from my therapy training. I removed myself from my situation that was so traumatic to the top, and that enabled me to see in the distance all the dangers that might be coming my way. And that was the same with the campaign. I did that, I used that skill, and I managed to envisage problems, and that kept me alert and not complacent with it. So I expected problems along the way, and it materialized, of course. But the helicopter skills also kept me aware of support around me. So it was a really good skill to have.
Yeah, that's an amazing tool for everyone here, I think. And many people here will have been in the thick of leading in a crisis, leading in an incident, and having the ability, training the ability in yourself to take your head out of that and look down on it. And as you say, not just be able to see the situation and what's going on clearly, but to be able to see help around you is an exceptionally key skill.
Yes, totally important.
Amazing. So when someone is in an incident and there is a crisis going on, be it personal or professional, what would you say are some of the qualities of best leaders in a crisis, the most resilient people that you've met?
I think it's okay to feel the pain. It's really important to feel the pain. That is not just at a crisis point, but also when you have setbacks along the way. You need to feel the emotion. And I spent, I said recently, now the low's done, I need to go and grieve for Martin. And I started therapy, and I realized in therapy, I don't need to start it. I've been grieving all along. And doing the legislation was part of my grieving process. But I think acknowledging the emotion was important at the very beginning, because I cried and cried and cried a lot in the first few months. And it was then the work with Martin's Law started, and I had to push the emotion a bit to the side, but it was always there in the background, and it's okay. It's not something to fear, but I could not have that intensity of grief bang smack in front of me, because that would have hindered me doing the work. So I think to be able to compartmentalize is quite helpful, because you can't do everything at once, but to also have the ability to feel the emotion, but not stay in it, in the most intense emotion too long. That's really important. You can't get comfortable in it.
Yeah, there's something also in there in how you represent yourself to the people around you, and the vulnerability that it takes to be a really, really good leader. I personally think anyway. I think there is something special in most brilliant leaders, but people that have been your greatest bosses are the ones that weren't infallible, but they did it anyway. And they were strong, but you could see their human characteristics, and you could see the vulnerability within them. And the way that they relate to their team was carrying that, but not letting that prevent them from doing the right thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I suppose, you know, you need to, as a leader, be okay with setbacks. You need to almost, I'd go a step further, and I think you need to expect setback. I never, once I was properly in the Martin's Law process, I never expected it to be smooth all the way. And there were difficult times, and one of them led to the walk, of course, because I was so frustrated. But actually, that frustration never led to me giving up. Yeah. It was just, I accepted it as another big setback, and I had to process. It's always, when you have a setback, it's important to process and then move on from it, not staying too comfortable in that process. And I think for me, one of the, you know, for instance, I'll give you an example. The last few months when the legislation was in the House of Commons initially, and then later on in the House of Lords, in both houses, individual ministers and one of the ladies stood up and said something on the lines of, well, we need not rush into legislation because we feel sorry for victims. And that both times cut deep. They were about a month apart. But I was hurt by that comment because I was sat in the gallery listening to it. They knew, those individuals knew I was there, they could see me. Despite that, they made that comment. And we live in a democracy. It was valid comments to make. But for me personally, it was painful to hear. So I had to go away and not sulk, but feel the emotions, feel sorry for myself. I felt sad for myself. I was upset. I thought, well, I can't believe they said that about me. And that feeling was really important to stay in for a short while. But after that, and that's happened not just with those two incidences, but with all the setbacks I've had along the way, after that, there comes a point when you think, okay, you've wallowed enough in that pit of self-pity, get out of it, you know, snap out of it. And actually, I came back every single time, even more determined, even more clear with what I want and the direction I need to go in. So it almost fueled it and gave me the more strength.
Yeah, but I think the really important thing you've said there is taking the time to feel it. Yes. I mean, I've had similar experiences where I've gone to talk to people, really senior security leaders, about the technology that I've developed for improving crowd resilience in public spaces. And obviously, I'm very emotionally wedded to that. It means a lot to me. You have that personal vision of why, and you have that exact same thing. And when you hear someone go, oh, you know, it's nice, but it's a one-off occasion, and it would never be another terrorist incident here, and it's we don't want to have to buy something for the, you know, the 0.01%. It really does get you personally. But I think being able to harness some of that challenge and put it into what you're doing is what you've done so incredibly well, and it really is an absolute inspiration.
How did you deal with that when you have setbacks?
So the first time that happened to me in a meeting, I found it really flooring because I was fairly young in the industry. I'd built the thing that I thought was the greatest thing in the world, and everyone should buy it. And I was completely outraged that someone wouldn't want to understand the need for that thing. But I dealt with it in the room, and I was very professional, and I went home and I cried a lot. And I probably did, without really knowing it, exactly what you're talking about doing, and then dusted myself up, picked myself up, and actually it was a year that security policing was on, and I went to that show, and I talked to so many fabulous people about the need for our technology, and I just thought, that one person does not define the story.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I kept pushing on with it.
Well, I'm glad you did.
And so I think it's worth, given where we are in the world and all the craziness going on, probably talking about why, in the context of the complete madness that's going on globally, should we invest in personal resilience now?
I think personal resilience is really important, not just in business life or when you want to change legislation or bring legislation about. I think personally, in our personal lives, we need to have those skills. Children need to learn the skills of resilience because we live in a really tough world and it's getting even tougher. Look at geopolitically what's going on. It's quite a frightening time we live in. And children, no doubt, are, although they may not understand everything that's on the news, they are aware that things are not brilliant at the moment, even if they don't get why.
Yeah. There's definitely a degree of self-resilience that everyone kind of needs to start to build in what they do. And you talked about some of those practical skills that you can do, that helicopter view. I personally also think there's something in exposing yourself to difficult experiences. And there's something in stress testing yourself in these times where everything is okay, because we just don't know what's going to come around the corner. So for me personally, I also look to kind of stress test what I'm comfortable with doing. So do the things that make me uncomfortable. Go and speak on the stage. Go and climb the mountain or whatever it may be, to try and build a level of personal tolerance to get to the point that when you do face something difficult, you can look back and say, there's this huge list of things that I've done before. Yeah. And because I've done that before, I can do this now.
Yeah. So before Martin died, I obviously had my own business and I was very comfortable. I worked from home in my basement, had a therapy room and a little tiny classroom for workshops, and it suited me because I was an introvert and I didn't do big crowds. So working on a one-to-one with clients was ideal for me. Then I started teaching and lecturing, and I remember the first day I walked into a lecture room and half the students were already in the room, and I walked out, went to the loo and had a massive panic attack because I don't do crowds. And then I walked back in saying, hi, I'm Figen Murray, sorry I'm red, sorry I'm shaking, just had a panic attack in the loo. Just ignore my redness and my shaking, it'll go. And it went, but that was me. Then Martin died, and I thought, well, the worst things happened to me. And then Nick Aldworth asked me to go to Farnborough to the big police conference, and I talked in front of, I think, 300 people, and it was okay. And then I went as before Brexit, my MEP, Member of Parliament, the European one, asked me to go to Brussels to the European Parliament. He said, would you come and talk there? And I said, yeah. And I thought, did I just say yes? And I realized that actually I changed. So major catastrophic events can actually change you as a human being. I mean, I changed for the better, don't get me wrong, but my life view has changed. Yeah. And I'm okay with that.
It really reminds me of that Eleanor Roosevelt quote that a woman is like a tea bag. You only know how strong she is when she gets into hot water.
Yeah.
It's it's absolutely that, isn't it? It's just, it changes your mindset entirely. Okay, so let's leave people with one final piece of advice. So in terms of personal resilience for the leaders in the room today, if they're going to go home and start doing one thing, what would that be? What would you advise people to start doing?
Always challenge yourself and never stop learning. I did a master's in counter-terrorism because I needed to understand why Martin died. I was a complete layperson at the time. Now I know an awful lot about terrorism. But I would say my learning never ever stops, and it came to fruition because at the time I did my master's, little did I know I'm going to be talking to ministers and home secretaries, and thankfully I can hold a professional conversation with them because of my knowledge. But knowledge is power and knowledge empowers, so always, always come to these events, learn from each other, and try and find courses and webinars and whatever. Never stop learning.
Oh, well, thank you so much. This has been an absolute honour to talk to you today, and I hope everyone has been that sponge that I was trying to be and taken in some of that amazing advice. So yeah, thank you very much, Figen Murray.
Thank you.